Once upon a time, in a quiet valley where the morning mist clung to the grass like a soft silver blanket, lived a little girl named Goldilocks. She was called this because her hair was the color of fresh straw, shining with a pale golden light even on the cloudiest of days. She lived in a small, sturdy cottage with a thatched roof and windows that sparkled like diamonds in the sun. The cottage stood right at the very edge of an ancient, magnificent forest. This was a place of deep peace. The trees were massive, with bark as thick and wrinkled as an elephant's skin, and roots that travelled deep into the dark, cool earth. High above, their branches wove together to create a ceiling of emerald leaves, through which the sunlight fell in long, slow beams, illuminating tiny dust motes dancing in the air. One quiet afternoon, the air was filled with the scent of wild thyme and sun-warmed pine needles. Goldilocks' mother handed her a small basket woven from dried willow branches. "My dear," her mother said, her voice as gentle as a lullaby, "would you go into the woods and gather some blueberries for our evening meal? But listen closely. Stay where the sun touches the path and do not wander where the shadows grow long." Goldilocks nodded, her golden curls bouncing softly. She stepped into the cool shade of the forest. The ground was cushioned with deep green moss that felt like a thick carpet under her feet. For a long time, she was content. She watched a family of tiny wood mice scurrying under a fern, and she listened to the rhythmic drumming of a woodpecker high in a cedar tree. The blueberries were everywhere, dark, plump, and covered in a dusty blue mist. As she picked the berries, dropping them one by one into her basket with a satisfying thump, she found herself following a trail of the largest, sweetest fruit. She moved slowly, step by step, deeper into the heart of the woods. The air became cooler, and the silence became deeper, broken only by the soft rustle of her dress against the tall grass. By the time her basket was full, the sun had begun its slow descent toward the horizon. The golden light turned into a rich, honey-colored amber, and the long shadows of the trees stretched out like fingers across the moss. Goldilocks stopped and looked around. The familiar path was nowhere to be seen. The great forest, while beautiful, now felt vast and mysterious. She realized she had wandered much further than she intended. But as she began to feel the first flicker of worry, a wonderful, comforting scent drifted through the trees. It was the smell of toasted oats, wildflower honey, and a hint of warm cinnamon. It was a smell that spoke of home and safety. Following the scent, she stepped into a hidden clearing. In the center stood a house unlike any she had ever seen. It was built from heavy silver-grey logs, and its roof was a thick velvet layer of green moss and tiny white flowers. The window frames were carved with patterns of leaves and acorns, and a warm orange glow flickered behind the glass. It looked like a place where kindness lived. Goldilocks walked to the heavy oak door. It was beautifully carved, with the image of a great sun rising over a forest. She knocked, the sound echoing softly in the quiet clearing. "Hello?" she called, her voice small and polite. "Is anyone home? I have lost my way." No one answered. The door, heavy but perfectly balanced, swung open just an inch. Goldilocks, hoping to find a friendly face and perhaps a bit of warmth, pushed the door open and stepped inside. She stood in the entryway, breathless with wonder. The interior was a masterpiece of woodcraft. The floors were made of wide, polished planks that caught the light of the fire crackling in a massive stone hearth. In the center of the main room stood a magnificent table, carved from a single giant trunk of a cherry tree. The wood was a deep reddish brown and shone with the soft luster of beeswax. On the table sat 3 bowls. The first was a massive basin of dark, rough-hewn oak. The second was a medium-sized bowl made of fine, polished birchwood. The third was a tiny, delicate bowl carved from white maple, smooth as a river stone. Steam rose from each bowl in slow, lazy swirls. Goldilocks was so very hungry. She picked up a heavy wooden spoon and tried a sip from the great oak bowl. "Oh," she whispered, the sound muffled by the thick walls. "This porridge is much too hot." It felt like the midday sun. She moved to the birchwood bowl and took a sip. "Oh," she said, shaking her head gently, "this porridge is much too sweet." It tasted as if a whole hive of bees had emptied their honey into it. Finally, she took a small spoon and tried the porridge in the tiny maple bowl. She closed her eyes. It was perfect. It was creamy, warm, and tasted of the forest and the fields. It was the most wonderful meal she had ever had. She ate every single drop, scraping the bottom of the little white bowl until it was clean. Feeling full and a bit sleepy, she looked toward the fireplace. There stood 3 chairs, each a work of art. The largest was a throne of dark walnut, with a back so high it reached toward the ceiling. Goldilocks climbed into it, but the wood felt cold and the seat was as hard as a rock. "This chair is too firm," she sighed. The middle chair was made of curved willow branches and filled with thick, woolly cushions. She sat down and immediately sank so deep she could hardly see over the arms. "This chair is too soft," she mumbled. Then she saw the smallest chair. It was carved from light ash wood, with a seat woven from soft rushes. She sat down, and it fit her perfectly. She felt the warmth of the fire on her face and began to relax. But as she leaned back, a soft, tired snap came from the wood. One of the delicate legs gave way, and Goldilocks tumbled gently onto the soft sheepskin rug. She felt a pang of guilt for the broken chair, but her exhaustion was now so great that she could barely keep her eyes open. She saw a set of stairs made of split logs and followed them up to a quiet loft. There, under the sloping roof, were 3 beds. The first was a massive frame of heavy pine, covered in a quilt of thick, dark wool. It was too high and too heavy. The second was a bed of carved cedar with a duvet of many-coloured silks. It was too fluffy and made her feel as if she were floating away. The third bed was a simple frame of pale birch. It was covered in a light, soft blanket that smelled of dried lavender and summer wind. Goldilocks lay down, and the mattress seemed to hug her. Within seconds, she was in a deep, dreamless sleep. Her golden hair spread across the pillow like a halo. While she slept, the owners of the house returned from their walk. They were not the wild bears of the deep, dark woods, but the wise guardians of the forest. They wore tunics of woven flax and moved with a quiet, heavy grace. Papa Bear was as tall as a young oak, with fur the colour of charcoal. Mama Bear had eyes like amber beads and fur the colour of autumn leaves. Baby Bear was small and round, with a curious nose that was always twitching. They entered their home and immediately felt a change in the air. Papa Bear looked at the great cherry-wood table. "Someone has been tasting my porridge," he said, his voice like the low rumble of distant thunder. Mama Bear looked at her birchwood bowl. "Someone has been tasting my porridge too," she said, her voice like the rustle of wind in the pines. Baby Bear looked at his empty maple bowl. "Someone has been tasting my porridge," he squeaked, "and they have eaten it all up." They moved to the hearth. Papa Bear looked at his walnut throne. "Someone has been sitting in my chair," he observed calmly. "And someone has been sitting in my chair too," said Mama Bear, touching the disturbed cushions. Baby Bear held up a piece of the broken ash wood. "Someone has been sitting in my chair," he said sadly, "and now it is broken." The bears did not grow angry. They were wise and knew that only someone very small and very lost would seek shelter this way. They moved silently up the log stairs. One by one, they looked at the beds. "Someone has been sleeping in my bed," whispered Papa Bear. "Someone has been sleeping in my bed too," whispered Mama Bear. Baby Bear crept to the edge of the smallest bed. "Look," he whispered. "Someone is sleeping in my bed right now." The soft sound of their breathing woke Goldilocks. She opened her eyes to see 3 large, kind faces looking down at her. She didn't see claws or teeth. She saw the deep, patient wisdom of the woods. "I am so sorry," Goldilocks said, her voice trembling as she sat up. "I was lost, and I was hungry, and I was so very tired. I did not mean to break your chair." Papa Bear knelt down, his massive form filling the room with a sense of safety. "Do not weep, little one," he said. "The forest is wide, and even the brightest sun can lose its way behind the clouds. You are safe here." Mama Bear smiled and reached out a soft paw to pat Goldilocks' hand. "Your mother is likely searching the edges of the woods for you. The moon is full and bright. We will show you the way home." Goldilocks helped Baby Bear gather the pieces of the broken chair, promising that her mother would help them fix it. Then the four of them, the giant bear, the graceful mother bear, the little cub, and the golden-haired girl, walked through the moonlit forest. The silver light turned the trees into pillars of salt and the moss into a sea of grey velvet. When they reached the edge of the valley, they saw the golden lantern of Goldilocks' mother swinging in the dark. "Goldilocks! Goldilocks!" she cried out. When the mother saw her daughter emerging from the trees with the legendary guardians of the forest, she fell to her knees in relief. Goldilocks ran to her, and they embraced for a long, long time. Goldilocks explained everything: the hunger, the house, the porridge, and the kindness of the bears. Her mother, her heart full of gratitude, looked at the three bears standing tall and noble in the moonlight. "You have kept my daughter safe," the mother said. "Please, the night is cold and you have travelled far. My table is set, and though I have only simple stew and fresh bread, I would be honoured if you would share it with us." The bears bowed their heads in thanks. They followed the mother and daughter into the small cottage. It was a wonderful sight. The great bears sitting on the floor around the small table, their large paws carefully holding the mother's ceramic bowls. They ate fresh bread crusted with seeds and a hearty stew of roots and herbs. Goldilocks sat next to Baby Bear, and they shared a bowl of sweet, fresh blackberries, the very ones she had picked earlier. And Goldilocks' mother showed the bears how to mend a wooden chair using strong glue and twine. That night, Goldilocks learned that while it is important to follow the path, it is even more important to be brave enough to say, "I am sorry." And the bears learned that a human home could be just as warm and welcoming as a hidden house in the woods. From that evening on, the golden light of the cottage and the silver light of the forest house were always connected by a path of friendship, and they all lived in peace and harmony for many, many years to come. The end.